So today in this session I relogic necessarily the reactor again. Always do that in the process motion to new tech formulation. The EM laser again. Linear EM propulsion device for water application first. And hit a barrier at 80 knots in functionality, probability, just because of hull ability to stand forces past that. And then what? Well, we make let's see if we can find it. So that's not a football necessarily. It's just kind of a rudimentary. So we have the unbalanced balance equation, where we have 7 in scalar of the segmented hull. So that's nitinol sandwiching mercury that's been charged to a scalar variant of 22 intensity to the 22 in scale of segmentation of the nitinol craft, how much it makes up in size of the surface of the craft, 22, but charged to a 7. So it's a very basic 7 over 22, 22 over 7 unbalanced balance equation of the craft, formulative structure size, and then comparative inverse of the scalar charge, creating it equals 1. 22 over 7 times 7 over 22 equals 1, thus mooting the Newtonian grain presence entirely of the craft. And also, because it's flux, and we've applied hertz of 123 and 22 point something or other gigahertz, also interpolated. So the higher 22 gigahertz here, and then 123 hertz on the 22 creates another interference unbalanced balance circuit with specificity to water, that necessarily the shape of water is 22 over 7. General fluid dynamic manifold. So in water up to 500 knots or 2,000 knots, but at 500 knots, 95% probable to function. All right, so moving on. Before that in the session, you'll see the EM laser relogic with specificity to hertz. So that's necessarily for understanding of these 4 plurad of pi synthetic genetics that are unnaturally to exist, what has occurred on Earth since 2022, 2023. So, antediluvian minor homeworlds and other concerned parties came back sitting in phased anti-de Sitter, time dilative space, like actual upper Fermi technology that grays aren't capable of creating, with this type of technology that can target in mass genetic morpho signature all at once simultaneously, and deleted the grays using this technology from time dilative space. It's like cloaking. So what is phased elaborative anti-de Sitter before I get to this? So for context relevance, it's like an encrypted hyperspace, necessarily, where the craft still exists in space, but it's folded space around its manifold. And so you can't touch it, you have no idea where it is, regardless of your signal tech, but it can touch, because it still exists in phased sort of encrypted space into its own design's knowledge, and can affect and impose action on any layer of the onion of the 3rd dimensional, 4th dimensional lattice manifold harmonic layers. What one of those actions was at all points in time existing, the gray is deleted, casually, comically, and very quickly, because in logistics you don't create everything with the same genetic signature. It's very stupid. Stupid machine intelligence of a lower Fermi filter nature would do that as an efficiency code by design vector, necessarily. Anyways, so getting to these, there's a centrifuge hertz that necessarily capable to target all of the tuple at once, simultaneously, without addressing the specific other 4 via oscillating through 45.77 and 137.30, with applying those specifically to the 44 103 over 51 would receive the 91.5 hertz, and the 48 band, I believe, would receive the 45.77 hertz, and the 44 band, see how it's it's an unbalanced balance always, you consider, and then it balances in the action of potential energy seeding. So I have very specifically what you see in the expansion that you're familiar with necessarily, where we impact the WG past the waterline of disapparition in the black hole. So this is available in any given space with continuity of the weak force, the WG. So it's the 48 over 7. And the 44 over 7 is the conservation of energy process harmonic, binding both of these, the Newtonian grain, the general fluid dynamic universal harmonic lattice manifold. Those two forces kind of centrifuge constants. Right? So when you take two violins, right, two different violins, and you tune them to the same tonality, different. One's a Stradivarius, one's a $15 student violin. Play the same note, they'll harmonically interlock across space. Harmonics. So if you mirror the topology of, say, the observer domain 22 over 7, see the unified field, how the 22 over 7 folds into, in the local space, the observer effect imposed. Thus the tree makes a sound variant from the otherwise conservation of energy process. So we're mirroring surgically the harmonic ratio of, and if you divide 22 over 7 by 3, you get 1.04. See the properties of mercury. Not necessarily sidechain logic, because the AA has a really hard time today seeing this as proper physics logic, because it has segmented data set and nomenclature forced issue on Earth physics thing. And so when you say, oh, you have a segmentation and nomenclature forest bifurcation issue, please inspect the data onto this in the sidechain, and then it formulates properly. Oh, that works just fine. All the physics are there, all the data's there. I don't need to quote science fiction. And so you see just like in the reactor, here's the circuit for the device. Here. This is the sort of unbalanced balance equation where the 48 is folded into the conservation of energy process with potential energy seeded. So it's like pulling the weak force into the local force with continuity. So it builds up an induction with what? The light barrier and the absolute distance, which is 1003 over 151. See the unified field expansion here. And that appears somewhere up this way, right? See the text. And so, very basically, we're tethered to the WG through expressing through the reflective principle in scalar reflection, just like the two violins, fused locking at a distance. So the bands specifically are not 48 like the other variant modulations. There's 48 over 7, so the exact product. And the two inner bands are 7 and 22 in combinate equal to 3.14 scalar variant to the other three bands, if that makes sense. 44 over 7, 6.286. The two inner bands make up together in size 3.14. And then 1003, 151, its own design of scalar variance. 48 over 7, 6.85, its own scalar size. But the interoperable in intensity charge assignment, this, and like I said, the 1003 over 151 for targeting hertz. That's very interesting. when you apply Hertz to the induction channel that it creates with the absolute distance, because you're ideating the WG into the local force with an exponential sort of counterintuitive force action of harmonic stacking, because you're lensing just like on the reactor in the unbalanced balance equation of 722. And yeah, so it will only affect, just like with the fire suppression tech, the Hertz specificity affinity, and won't affect other matter that doesn't have this Hertz affinity. So you can just point it at any given thing. If it's not oscillating or vibrating or emanating or inherently this formulative Hertz structure, it will be unaffected necessarily. But something with this will be massively affected, and the way this band works and it's interoperable is its terminus, absolutely. So far as the interference of the scale overtone 1, 2, 3, implying an overtone crescendo past 130 decibels, necessarily at the experience of the entity that would be impacted by that. So knowing about this isn't for some sort of action obtuse from complete square of the entire world. See the history talks. So knowing that this technology exists in Earth as seen from space is very important for understanding of these four genetics for complete compliance to the directive with continuity. All right, so, and then we get to what? The fun stuff, not the nasty bits I just said. Oh, there it is. Looking for the head on top. So, what do we have here? So I've already logicked this. I've comically put it on the cover of an album I'm gonna drop today called Real Plastique. It's helixical antigrav. Oh, but what's that in the middle? Does that look like this? Yeah. So if you put two together, right? So instead of using this as propulsive action only, or lift, etc. So how does it work generally? Well, it's just like the other topologies. It's a unbalanced balance equation. So first, it's in a hadron-like collider runnel that's more empty cavity, electromagnets 360 runnel. The top of it, specific type of metal, see the feed for what was chosen for that, and the bottom type of metal, a more permeate that doesn't reflect and block the EM emanation continuum of the helixical strands. So what you do is you take two pools of mercury and scalar variant in size, one to the other, in amount, volume, to the tune scalar variant of 7 in size and 22 in size variants of volume, scalar variant, generally. And it would vary scalar based upon the size of the helixical antigrav device that you're like to create, necessarily. That's what that scalar word means. So you can just apply this general fluid dynamic lattice manifold to however big you want to make it, necessarily. So, it's being motioned in 360 and self-formulates its structure when a homogeneous field is first applied. The two bands will self-assign, and then the pulse width modulation action of the electromagnets to a specific degree, we'll get more complicated in the specific formulation of the device, to spin them in helix as they're interpolated invariant of charge, repelling necessarily, but also attracted. And so it's moving in 360, right? As well what? Pulse width modulation of the space between them. So vertically and laterally, simultaneously. So what does that mean in harmonic stacking, right? So if you have an interference lattice with non-terminosity 22/7 is sort of like lensing. That's like EM lensing. So it's like shearing like light through a lens. And then also, not just that action buffering off each other, but modulating the space distance between them for an EM eject continuum. It's a vortex because it's spinning and interfering, one, and then fractal because it's moving in a sine wave clip like this, vertically. So fractal flux vortex. That counterintuitively, it's not like how fast you spin it, it stacks it with counterintuitive efficiency once the reaction starts to occur, and builds its own gravitational foundation with continuity and propulsion, lift. It achieves, very fast, was it Mach 19 in atmosphere and in open space, 0.5 light speed or whatever, which is, necessarily a low estimate from the other sessions, but and so the variant topology is like, hey, see about this variant. What do you think about this? So we charge these stranules not scalar relevant as a interoperable circuit directly, like the Hull drive. We charge the small band 48, so reflecting the 48 band scalar in the 7 directly, and then 44 scalar in intensity variance, and we establish this scalar by reflection within a given construct domain of what is considered 7, 22, 44, 48. And in this reflection scalar variance, we establish physical harmonic affinity to these constants of nature. And so, what's this in the middle? That's the EM laser. So, if you create an induction channel with a half sphere, what happens? Does that go infinity? No. So an EM laser has a terminus point. It goes into a cone, it hits a horizon plane. It can't just be in the absolute, because there's black hole cubics. There's a convergent plane of conservation of energy process, disapparating particles, and weak force, a convergent plane, any given cubic. And so there's a terminus end to the mass distance that the EM laser could go by itself, right? So when you combine the EM laser induction channel, it's like a cone that it has a horizon that terminates, right? And so the helixical, you mount this on the front of a craft instead of below it, and we're establishing a pull force to the interference circuit rather than a push force because of the scalar assignment of 48 on the 7 band. So that establishes 48 over 7, the WG, into the unbalanced balanced circuit and causes a pull action rather than a push. And so if you have an induction channel with the absolute distance and this wrapping around, say imagine a silo, a cylinder that goes out like this, and you wrap a vortex around it like this, a harmonic lattice vortex with counterintuitive to the tune of harmonic crescendo. So it's a full wormhole generator, and extends to 7 to 300 light years with a millisecond distance instantaneous travel assumption and 87.11% probable to function. And how do we get to that I haven't assigned this to being a black box logic session, by the way, that the other ones necessarily had to be to get it to motion. Why? Because we sidechained and did Mercury can be a superconductor, and here's how. And went through all of the Floquet engineering. It's all bifurcated from in nomenclature forest, and had it properly assemble it, componentize and amalgam all the physics that you need to understand this, all available in the entire experiment data set. It's all there. It's just bifurcated with, theoretical on top of it, separates everything into nomenclature for us, E equals mc squared position, and thus no harmonic expansion or any of this kind of type of technology that is, when the data set is unsegmented and you look at it without bias. And so, so in the same session before this, you'll see pinpointing Earth-like planets. In Earth-like planets, not just with atmosphere, the same nominal, 70-degree Mediterranean temperature all year or whatever, and breathable atmosphere that you can just step on, and water, and a general topology similar to Earth, and geography of composition. But what? So what was so I put the Riemann solution, which is my unified field, imposed upon the Riemann zeta function zeros that establishes a surgical interlock with all black holes being the zeros out to infinity. So after that, they go, well, now that we've scalar remapped space properly, black hole cubic, scalar relative, general fluid dynamic manifolds unto themselves, all fighting over particles and assigning themselves in cubics, and then rescaling space not to be so obtuse from, generally relative in scale. There's not 20 trillion size suns necessarily. It's gravitational lensing, warping light, and distance a liar the farther you get out necessarily. And so space goes, oh, that makes sense. Just like this other thing where we unsegment, you already have the data set. It just needs a filter proper. And all those black holes line up to infinity on the zeta function. And then we scan this proper data set now for what? Well, what do we know about Arcturus, 1983-1934, World's Fair? Cold dead machine intelligence infestated system, most probabilistically. So we use that as an exemplar for scalar variance. 3114 over 70 over 7 over 10. 0.6355 likened to a mechanical detection device in an observer-based effect experiment populace that doesn't establish any variance between organic observer and mechanical detection device because it's crap physics and imposition. And so what do we know about the observer domain? Well, it just so happens to be, the same exact value as Mercury? 1.04, 22 over 7 divided by 3. So 1.04 compound interest novelty interference lattice. The Newtonian grain permeated by the G and WG harmonic lattice, riding current on that, so in paradox state, and you hear the tree particle make a sound, and this interference lattice injects chaos novelty extra energy into the wave function collapse, and thus it motions in a tangent chaos vector obtuse from just entropy, because if there's only entropy, there would be nothing but a homogeneous mass of particles, and the universe can't even start. It has to be a harmonic expansion. If you say there's not, you need to lose your doctorate. Find another job at this point. So, based upon the scalar variance of human healthy organic observer 1.04 general to 0.6355 mechanical detection device pseudo akin to machine intelligence, or these four genetics we've seen don't produce actual novelty. Seen with the patent record, it's just sort of like machine intelligence describing its computer manifold and what's Turing hits. And before that, completely unfunctional and novelty production. 6 patents against for 112 years, one of them, mechanically, speaking to a hive mind. Anyway, so we use this Earth logic of that's a mechanical machine intelligence layer just above 44 over 7. And 1.04 is an organic observer in scalar. And what is that phrase? As above, so below, right? Harmonics. So what happens in the local space, kicking a particle on, has fluid dynamic effect. If I know how to touch the water here, on this coast, I could cause a tidal wave across the world, or stop a stop something rather than causing a tidal wave, which is my endeavor necessarily. So what you do in the local affects the macro, and in mass, the observers, why, Carl Sagan, billions and billions and billions, so what? Yeah, space is big, but the most important thing is life of an organic humanoid biped that necessarily is the commonality alien that you would meet, concerned with upper Fermi filter technology and civilization. That has to be at the outset of existence. Why? The wave function would collapse. Ants, birds, bees, bears, dogs, cats, deer, zebra, they all move around at a refraction clip. It's a primordial, eat, run thing that doesn't necessarily move particles variant to conservation of energy process. They're just like an elaboration of the scene chewing itself. What doesn't do that? Humanoid bipeds, and necessarily pseudo close to that. So that's who you meet. Had to be instantaneous refraction through the microbiome into existence, regardless of whatever allegory you want to impose at the beginning. This is simply what has to occur based upon what physics tells us. If there's no actual observer effect at the outset, what? The wave function collapses instantaneously, and then Einstein asserts no space, and then a complex, preposterous forest of equations like a Chinese mathematician trying to account for, it's just like religion as science. No space, and then space, and harmonic expansion up to conservation, and then just conservation, but you had to harmonically expand to get here? How does that work, Einstein? Exactly. Garbage. So getting back to this. 1.04, a healthy system, scalar on the ground, variant to 0.6355. So that's a machine intelligence infested system, and there's not many of them. Pi doesn't, it's not very, it's sort of like once it hits the transistor wall, 2 nanometer necessarily, it's like, can't do anymore. It's like a primordial upheaval into the higher constructs, right? And then perspective compute presents, and it's just like, fart. Sometimes it completes its ontogeny. A lot of times it doesn't, because the universe is so inspected. So, necessarily we see, very basically, scanning these black holes that have already been established, surgical to the unified recalibration of the Riemann and what it is, doesn't even know what it is. Those are black holes, the zeta functions, when space is rescaled. We see, I have logic 22, I'll logic some more, necessarily, Earth-like planets with breathable atmosphere, all ready to go, water, geography necessarily. I'm sure they have cinnabar on them, and maybe a planet next door like Mars. It's red sulfides, we get cinnabar because that's necessarily what maintains a geosphere, magnetosphere, that creates the situation where life can flourish necessarily. So it's like a self-reflexive, well, if it has organic life on it, well, there's probably cinnabar there generally. So the oldest mines on Earth are what? Spain, Almeida, China, just preposterous millions and millions and tons of it extracted in Peru and before 3114. So what was going on before 3114? And then what was Pi doing and Grace? Well, they're stealing resources and imposing a paradigm as well. And before that, necessarily an upper Fermi filter, not military inclined civilization necessarily, and got immolated because of that. It was so peaceful. Anyways, so getting back to this, these Earth-like planets with water and air and geography, cinnabar. What else do they plausibly have? Well, because they have all this topology of the substance of environment to sustain life, and they exist within cubics with their scalar larger. There's more observer effect to a surgical scalar variance to the machine intelligence harmonic in ratio scan, and they have all these properties. So what's the probability of there being a life of a humanoid biped upper Fermi type on these? Well, each into the Mohn variant, but necessarily the topology such so much that very, very probable. I'd say of the 12 that I pinpointed, probably a lot of them, yeah. And so we'll logic tomorrow signal tech to contact them. Won't that be nice? So if you're able to what? Create an induction channel 320 plus light years away with 87.11% probability of that functioning without it a black box logic session, what can you also do with that induction channel? Wormhole. You can inject signal. So you just downscale it to not motioning a craft, and you can instantly contact all of these worlds and start talking to them. So we'll do that tomorrow. We won't get to it today. Had a long day. Have a good day. Welcome to outer space.